Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Cash Flow Positive. My name is Kenny Bedwell, and this is the part 2 episode where we're going to talk about, holy crap, my Airbnb guest just sued me. And I have brought on an actual attorney who's a strategic advisor. He's a tax attorney and strategic advisor. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, all the way from asset protection to how to get really good insurance, what you need to look for in your insurance, and more importantly, your taxes and how to save in your taxes and just structure things appropriately. So if the inevitable happens, if you get sued, just like I did, you are protected or you have a plan in place. And so I brought in the guy that I personally use, Anthony Birster. He's based out of Texas. He's got his own firm. So he's a tax attorney. He specializes in tax reduction strategies, asset protection, and estate planning. So without further ado, Anthony, tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a tax attorney. I've got my own law firm, and we focus on cradle to grave services for entrepreneurs, high net worth individuals. We focus on asset protection, tax planning, and wealth planning, and how all of those kind of talk together. Most people are kind of looking at these things in a vacuum, so we take a holistic approach. Look at, our clients on that level and how all of these pieces are talking together and how to best move forward with their goals.
Okay. How long have you been doing that?
So I'm on year 3 with my own firm. Before I worked at a law firm, a boutique law firm, kind of doing something similar for about 2 years. Before that, I worked in finance at JP Morgan. So.
Okay. All right, cool. Sweet, man. So what I want to dive into today is talking about just asset protection, protect for short-term rentals. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. Number one, I haven't had any attorneys on yet, so congratulations on being the first. And I think this will be a really good topic that people will enjoy. But let's kind of start from the top. And I might skip around a little bit. So you lead this in the direction it's supposed to go, because I'm not the attorney. But most people think, let's start with like a common misconception. So a lot of people buy properties in their names. Okay, that's pretty common. And then you have a lot of people who buy properties in LLCs because it provides some sort of protection. What protection do you actually get?
Well, I guess it really depends. Just having an LLC does not actually get you protection if you're not following the formalities, right? So, I think it's all about different levels and where you're at. And, sometimes I think starting place definitely is an LLC, but if you're not following formalities, your LLC is not going to do you any good. And, having the right insurance, is a better protection than an LLC that isn't going to hold up in the court.
Why is that specifically?
So, just filing a piece of paper with the state, that actually forms your LLC, but there's other formalities you have to actually follow if we want asset protection. And we're talking about piercing the corporate veil here. It's a series of factors. So things like, having a bank account, is a property, when we're talking about rental properties, is a property actually in the LLC transferred via deed? Do we have insurance? Do we have meeting minutes? All of these little factors kind of tie into, hey, are we actually respecting this as its own entity? Or are we commingling and really this LLC shouldn't be respected?
That's interesting. So with actual LLCs, with our businesses, we should have, it's like a yearly meeting, right? And have recorded minutes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the easiest ones, right? Off the top, having a bank account, if you're talking about a rental property, actually deeding over the property to the LLC, having insurance, having a company agreement, and then, an annual meeting each year. can be a tax deduction, but also you're saving yourself by just having those minutes and approving, kind of what you're doing and being formal about the process.
Gotcha. Okay. And what are you supposed to do in this meeting? So if you're the only owner of that LLC, what's this meeting supposed to, what are you supposed to do there?
So, and you don't have to officially hold a meeting if you don't want to, right? But you do things that big corporations do, right? So what do you, this is a business. So, you review your financials of the previous year, kind of what you projected compared to how you actually performed. You probably want to project out financials too. Start thinking about, the goals of the company. What are you going to do moving forward? All of these little things going up, looking at your bookkeeping, making sure that we've got the books up to date. Anything that you do at a typical shareholders meeting, these big corporations do, we mimic it just at a smaller level.
Gotcha. Okay. So what's the benefit beyond the financing piece for the LLC component then?
So, not every LLC is created equally and not every entity is created equally. The benefit of having the LLC is, one, if we're actually following the formalities, it gives you in every state what I call inside protection. So that's, someone trips and falls, something happens in the property, it's to stop whatever, is happening inside that LLC to coming to you personally. And, whatever you have in that LLC could be at risk, but we're protecting our personal assets most of the time if we're following the formalities. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get sued for being the owner, but if we're following the formalities, liability should stop. And whatever's in that LLC could be at risk, but everything else should be protected.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. So one big question that I get a lot, and I'm always like, oh, talk to an attorney or an accountant. So we kind of have like all in one here, which is a special privilege. So I'll ask a lot of questions that hopefully the listeners will benefit from. But where should you file that LLC for that property?
So like I said, every LLC isn't created equally, or every business entity isn't created equally. And we go into steps. So step one is where the business is located, whether it's an operational business or a rental property. You want to form that LLC in the state where the property is located or where you're operating. Otherwise, the state's not going to give you any protections. If you're not registered in the state, it's as if that LLC doesn't exist.
Right.
So that's kind of level one. Now, when we're concerned about privacy and what I call outside liability protection, that's where different states, like you hear Wyoming, Delaware, Nevada, that would come in. But always number one is, where is the property located or where are we operating? And you want to wrap that in that state's LLC.
Okay. So now, let's say I'm buying a property in North Carolina. I get a North Carolina LLC, and I want some serious asset protection here. So I get good insurance. We can talk about that too. It'd probably be a good conversation as well. But getting good insurance, and then I guess we'll circle back to that one. But then is that like, are there other layers, other things that I can do to help protect myself?
Yeah. Again, step one is going to be kind of putting that in an LLC, whether you finance it in your personal name and later transfer it to the LLC. But always want to put that in the LLC first, and that's going to protect yourself from the LLC.
Real quick, that I just a follow up on that. So when you say transfer it from your personal name to an LLC, you're doing that through a quit claim deed. How soon after do you recommend people do that?
I don't really have a specific timeline. Yeah, I'd say let it kind of settle. Technically there are due on sale clause from my experience for paying the bills. you're they're not going to call that, but you don't want to just go in probably the day after and do the quick claim deed.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I'd just
Yeah.
say let it settle.
Okay.
Where were we going with that though?
Sorry. Yeah. I took us a little detour, but let's go back. So level one, getting the LLC in the state for the property. What's the next step up or next upgrade up for my protections?
Yeah. And we're always adequately insured. Level one, get that LLC where the state's formed. Level two is where I think, we have a couple rental properties. Maybe we've got some liquidity and we want to protect that liquidity. To me, 500 to $1 million in liquidity, 3 to 4 rental properties or properties in different states. That's where we want to think level two. And that's where a charging order protection entity comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the LLCs in Wyoming or Delaware. And these aren't to do business. They're just strictly there to kind of hold your assets. And so they hold those LLCs where the rental properties are actually located. And so instead of you owning it, your COPE would own it, the charging order LLC, and then you own that, or your revocable trust owns it.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. I would say that's level 3. We'll get to that one in a second. But so this Wyoming LLC. So why Wyoming? Like, what's the benefit of Wyoming?
So Wyoming, and it goes to asset protection and privacy, right? And so asset protection piece is that we get charging order protection, which means that if someone sues me civilly, they can't come over, even if I own this LLC 100%, they can't force me to sell whatever's in that LLC. The most they can do is essentially get a lien against the distribution. And that's what that charging order is. Some states don't offer that protection. So, states like Florida, California, these blue states, especially if you own something 100%, essentially a creditor can come in and take control over that asset, where the states like Wyoming don't. Why I really like Wyoming and Delaware is they also offer a layer of privacy. So these states also don't disclose ownership in any public form. Now, if you get sued, and in law school they teach you basically in a lawsuit you sue everybody and then you kind of figure it out in court. So if you get sued and your Wyoming LLC also gets sued, you might have to disclose ownership in that lawsuit. But just going on Google or the county clerk's website, you're not going to be able to find who owns that in those states.
Right. So it's just a little more difficult to see if it's for an attorney to see if it's worth even pursuing a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the big benefit is that charging order protection. So it forces people to kind of really think about settling, because otherwise you can call the bluff and wait it out. Typically 10 years for a statute of limitation. So, if you're really at a bust and they're at a standstill, they don't want to settle, they want to come after you and put that lien in. If you don't make distributions for those 10 years, and sometimes it can be extended, they're kind of SOL once that statute of limitation runs. So again, it forces people take the insurance, go the easy route, instead of trying to come after everything that you've worked hard and built your whole life.
Gotcha. Okay. So we have LLC, and then you have this Wyoming LLC or S Corp. Does that matter?
Yes, it does matter. So an LLC can actually be taxed 4 different ways. It can be a sole proprietorship, which means, you got one owner. It can be a partnership if it's got 2 owners. So one owner, default sole prop, 2 owners, the default's the partnership. And then you have to make tax elections for these other 2. So S corporations and C corps. Those are generally for operational businesses. C corps are going to be, if you're probably trying to sell it later on in bigger corporations. S corporations are for those operational businesses. Most of the time, we don't want real estate to be owned in an S corp because you lose some of the tax benefits. The only time it makes sense is if we're flipping property or you're a real estate dealer.
Sure. Okay. So the Wyoming LLC, we'll say Wyoming, it's going to own, like, let's say you have properties in like me, North Carolina, New York, Kentucky, all these other places. So it's going to own, that one LLC is going to own all those different LLCs, right?
Yep, it's gonna be 100% owner of each one of those LLCs.
Right. So now let's level up even further. What do you do? Like, what else can you do to the next level to protect yourself?
So, I think, and this doesn't really mean next level, but I think everybody, when you have assets, should have a revocable living trust. And that's really thinking generationally. And the purpose of the revocable trust is an asset protection, it's to avoid probate, which in a sense does protect your assets from costly fees, family fighting, and all of that. So, really having a good estate plan, I think fits in there kind of really at level one. But, once we're at 10 plus properties, or I like, 10 million to 15 million of total net worth, family limited partnership makes sense. A lot of people try to go into irrevocable trust, and I think they get oversold a lot. The FLP is going to give you some protections like the irrevocable trust, and probably a step up from the COPE LLC. But it's going to allow you to have control, which an irrevocable trust kind of hands that off to someone else. So it's a step in between the LLC and the irrevocable trust.
Gotcha. Okay. At what point should people, you kind of mentioned this, but it's worth asking and getting just get the answer. At what point should people start thinking about having a revocable, irrevocable trusts, or, the family partnerships or whatever?
So once you have assets, you should have an estate plan, whether that be a will or a revocable trust. The benefit of the revocable trust is we avoid probate. So the court isn't going to oversee. It's going to be more efficient, and it's private. For LLCs, if you've got assets and you're conducting businesses, if there's any risk, that's where we want that LLC in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Once we're, again, have different properties, maybe in different states, or we're at 3 to 4 rentals and a couple $100,000 to $1 million of net worth, that's where I think, hey, the charging order protection LLC makes sense. Also, if you're in a highly litigious field too, being a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, maybe you don't wait until that net worth statement, because you got a higher risk in your day-to-day life, right? If you're commuting a lot, driving 8 hours plus, going back and forth, getting in a car wreck's a serious thing too. So maybe that's where it makes sense to step in the COPE. The FLP is, again, I think 10 to 15 million is where it makes sense. We start getting a little bit of estate discounting benefits too. And then once we're over 25 to 30 million, that's where I think irrevocable trust makes sense. Unless we're talking about life insurance or special needs trust.
Right. Okay. So the trust. Okay. So that's really interesting. And how do you know? Is it just speaking with your, estate planner, which one you should do and how you should do it?
I mean, the biggest thing is always going back to your goals and kind of what you're trying to accomplish. And then also, being realistic of how much are we willing to spend to have these admin costs, right? I got clients who are 50 million plus, but they don't want to spend $1,000 on an LLC. So the FLP probably isn't going to make sense either.
Right.
But, I think it is having conversation with professionals, people that you trust, doing your own research too, but then always deferring back to the professionals, and don't just rely on TikTok for sure.
Yeah, seriously. Feel a lot of stuff on TikTok. You're like, what? That's funny. Okay. Um, let's circle back and talk insurance because I think that's actually really, really important for people that they actually don't understand as well as they should,
Hmm.
because that's where a lot of protection, in my opinion, comes from is having good insurance and being taken care of from that side. So for short-term rentals, I just you do you ever review people's policies, their insurance policies?
I mean, I'll take like a look on its face for the most part. I think the
Sure.
biggest issue I see with the insurance piece is not having the proper type of insurance.
Mm. So what do you mean by that? Let's talk about that. What do you see
So,
with proper?
it might be someone will buy this and they'll get a loan for, a vacation home loan, 10% down, something like that, right? Where when they go to shop insurance, they're getting it as if it's a residential property and their personal residence.
Mhm.
If you're actually renting that out, you need a commercial type property, maybe one specific for the short term rental space too. Something happens, and again, you're renting it out, and you've got something where it's supposed to be like a personal residence type of policy. It's not going to give you that protection there.
Mm. Okay. Sure. So that's number one. So making sure you have like short-term rental insurance. Um, do you, in terms of like the coverages and the amounts and things, like liability coverage and so on, do you have recommendations or preferences or things you look for that are adequate for the coverages?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I don't really have much to say, I guess, on that topic. As far as I typically would get, kind of max coverage, make sure it's with a good insurance company. We've got the adequate amount,
Mhm.
and then also who is insured too. I think is a big piece too.
Mm.
If we're moving the property to an LLC, we want that LLC to be an additional insured. You probably still want to be on there as insured because you'll probably get named in a lawsuit. But you want to make sure again the LLC, and if you're have that second layer too, that second layer is also protected.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you use do you recommend any umbrella policies or anything that for short-term rentals?
Yeah. Umbrella insurance is relatively cheap. I do recommend getting it, but I don't recommend relying on it. One thing about insurance companies is they don't like to pay and they don't make it easy on you either.
Mm.
And in a lawsuit, you're going to get sued, generally no matter what, unless you've got that good privacy and you don't want to be worrying about, what you have at risk. So I think the umbrella insurance, again, is a level one protection that's relatively inexpensive.
Right. Okay. Um, let's go to the tax side. So we talked a lot about like kind of protecting your assets and like structuring it properly. But from a tax side, how do you do this in a way? Does anything change or anything should change and or perspective change when you're trying to set this up in a tax beneficial way?
So your structure, as long as we're not operating in that S corp or C corp world, it doesn't change what tax benefits you get. So an LLC by itself isn't going to change any type of deduction you get, whether it's qualifying for the short term rental loophole, real estate professional status, or just writing off your cell phone.
Hmm. Gotcha. Okay. Um, do you, for tax purposes, like if someone's looking to do a cost segregation study benefit or some of these other things, are you looking, how should they kind of prepare themselves for this year when with purchasing a property and understanding the ins and outs to do that cost segregation study?
Yeah. What I like to do with my clients is we kind of project out, our income for the year and look at kind of how much we're going to pay in taxes. With the cost segregation studies right now in 2025, bonus depreciation's still at 40%. We do think that they're probably going to bring back 100% bonus, but I wouldn't count on it. So,
Mhm.
when we're thinking about buying any properties, first off, we want to make sure to look at all the other dynamics like appreciation, cash flow, and the debt pay down before we think about the tax benefits. But from there, we're underwriting it, at that 40% bonus depreciation.
Right.
And if we get 100%, that's going to be a cherry on top.
That would be great. That'd be really exciting. Yeah, I'm hoping for it. So we'll see. Do you know when's it supposed to come out, or when were we supposed to find out? Is it coming in the legislation? This coming up legislation, or
Yeah, I would expect sometime this summer.
okay?
That's when we probably know more.
I know.
Yeah.
So
But I
good
think
time. Good
they're
time to start
trying
looking
to.
for short term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they're trying to sort out this tariffs and trade war stuff. But I would expect sometime in the summer. They're not going to want to wait probably till next year because then we got the midterms coming up and uh, people on the hot seat.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Yeah. I just let's get it done this year. So um okay, cool, man. So in terms of like getting the right protection and understanding things, like should people try to just go to like, go online and try to set this up through like LegalZoom or some of these other sites, or like what's the best way to handle these types of structures?
I am biased, right? Because I get paid to set these things up. But what I'll say is, you don't know what you don't know, and a lot of times people wait till it's too late for asset protection. And if you're already sued, there's really not much you can do to set up and protect yourself because of something called a fraudulent transfer act. So really, I say, if you feel comfortable in yourself, you can do it. But anyone can set up an LLC. It's maintaining it and making sure you've got the proper documentation in place. That's where I think it's worth the advice. And if you're buying an asset worth a couple 100,000 on up, how much is $1,000 to make sure that you're protected?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Um so from a if we just kind of recap, I think there's a lot of good stuff here. The just kind of last thing I want to help people understand from this conversation is like I think most people fall in the camp like the listeners are in like one to maybe three properties. There's some that have a lot. There's some that have none. And so I think like everyone's situation is going to be different. You obviously need to speak to someone like yourself, like Anthony, an actual attorney and a CPA to understand your situation. But I think what Anthony said, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but um, a lot of times some of this stuff is oversold. Like, oh, you need to have all these like elaborate protections. And unless you are in a high risk profession or you have a really, really high net worth, like 5 million plus, is kind of what I heard, you don't need a whole lot of this. It's about having the right insurance. And I personally would like to see the listeners have better insurance and know what they need to, be protected from that side than worry about, like getting cheap insurance but paying for I've seen like $15,000-$20,000 like asset protection
Yeah.
packages out there. They really don't even need that. It's way complicated. For one property it's like, hold on, like like that's not the focus here. So
Yeah, and half the time they don't even maintain it right. So they pay 15 grand for an expensive kind of set of books and paperweight that's not going to protect them.
right.
Uh,
Right.
I think it is kind of in levels, and doing it at steps is really important. And insurance is a very inexpensive way to protect yourself. The LLCs and farming, irrevocable trust, and all of that becomes kind of smoke and mirrors if you don't have that foundational protection in place.
Hmm. Yep, I 100% agree. Yeah, it's like if you get named on a lawsuit, I mean, this crazy stuff is like you're right. They will go, the attorneys will go and they'll just sue everybody, and they have to figure it out in court. And that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, my LLC got sued. I personally got sued. And I remember asking them, I was like, hey, like, why is my personal name on this? And they're like, well, you own the LLC and we're just getting everybody. And I'm just like, holy crap. So we don't want to, we got to insure it. And the insurer really came in and took care of everything, so which was really nice. But it was stressful. And that's something when they just say, hey, look, don't worry about this. We'll take care of it. That's that peace of mind. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Anyway, well, cool, man. As we're kind of wrapping up here, do you have any other thoughts or any other things you want to share with us?
No, I mean, I think, I see two different sides of the spectrum. The people who get oversold and like overdo it, but then they're not building that foundational piece, or the people who are got everything and then they're all kind of standing on, one stilt. So I think, have the conversation. There's a lot of good resources out there. So educate yourself first and then go to professional just to make sure, you are protecting yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot. I think that as you start, especially if you're looking for your second one or your third one, it is important to start looking at those options and figuring out, number one, as short-term rental hosts, I think for tax purposes, we should try to get separate bank accounts set up for each property. Run it through a separate bank. I mean, like, that's just like number one, whether the property's in your own name or it's an LLC, get it in a separate bank account, pay out, what your expenses, the mortgage, everything in there. So it's separated, easier bookkeeping and cleaning. And then start thinking about how you can get it into an LLC, is kind of these levels. That's where I would really, really want people to focus on. And then go to insurance, just making sure you're covered. A couple of things, just quick hitters here that I look at with insurance. Are you covered with bed bugs? What's the situation there going to be like? Flood insurance, STR flood a lot. I know there's one I know specifically. I have a client. She listens to the podcast. Her property flooded. And then I had our Kentucky one flooded too. It's just like these things happen. What's your protection on that? Theft or damage to your property. Are you just going to be out of pocket for $20,000? Insurance can help with these things. What type of insurance do you have? With those four things, to be honest, bed bugs is a little iffy. Not all my properties, but I've had it happen before. I kind of see it as like, it's not a matter of if it happens, it's when it's going to happen and how am I going to react. So I'm always, those are the big four things I look for with my insurance. And I talk to my insurance companies, and I might have to get multiple policies to protect that property, even if it's short-term rental insurance, but just to make sure I'm covered, because I don't want to be out of pocket, 10, 20 grand and unexpectedly,
No.
So anyway, cool, man. Well, sweet, Anthony. So as we're, kind of concluding here, if someone wants to get in touch with you, talk about the tax, or the estate planning or the strategies, whatever, the asset protection, how do they get in contact with you, man?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Brister Law Firm, or go to bristertaxlaw.com. It's the best way to reach me, and just schedule a free discovery call. Happy to have a conversation.
It's making me, let's see, I'm going to add a banner here for everyone to see. Is this correct? bristertaxlaw.com.
Yep.
There it is. So if you're watching on YouTube, there it is right there. If you're listening to it, you're driving, do not take your hand off the wheel to go watch the YouTube video to see what the bristertaxlaw.com, but it is spelled as it sounds. So worst case, just reach out to me, Kenny, and Kenny Bedwell _Bedwell on Instagram, Facebook, and I'll connect you with Anthony, or bristertaxlaw.com, and schedule a call with him and his team. So, and for those of you who are listening, I do use Anthony. So there it is. So personal recommendation, somebody I personally use, bring them on the podcast. So, all right, cool. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you took notes or one or two things away from this that you can go and apply today to better protect yourself, save yourself on taxes, and just be in a better position overall with your short-term rentals. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode of Cash Flow Positive.